everyone, welcome to another Underrated Film Saturday, and today I thought it would be interesting to briefly address a Robin Williams film. Since I haven't actually touched on Robin Williams in quite some time, so I figured why not discuss one of his works that I think is a little bit overlooked. I did mention Good Will Hunting within one of my previous videos a while back. And I put it in the classic category because I felt that it got a lot of recognition. It sort of, got the ball rolling for some people's careers, in particular Matt Damon, as well as Ben Affleck. And Robin Williams' performance was a huge standout and a huge part of the film. And I felt overall it was one that a lot of people seemed to remember for that. Now, this film in particular has received its recognition and its box office numbers fairly well initially when it came out, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people remember this one for some reason. Or it's not really the one that I guess comes to mind. Usually when you think of a Robin Williams film, or if you think of Robin Williams in general, because usually, for the majority, at least for Robin Williams' film career, a lot of the films that he's done haven't been as well acclaimed either by audiences or by critics either. So, really, the only really standout film that really did receive a huge amount of recognition and, something that ultimately got remembered throughout the years was Good Will Hunting. And even though this film did well initially, I don't think it has that same recognition as Good Will Hunting does. But I still feel like it deserves a lot of credit, regardless of the fact that when you look at the majority of Robin Williams's films, they're probably not as strong compared to like the bad probably outweighs the good. But you have other films like Mrs. Doubtfire, which was another one that was fairly successful, and actually one more so that I think people remember, that and Good Will Hunting, but I don't think this film. And this film that I'm going to be discussing today is Dead Poets Society. Now, unlike Good Will Hunting or something like Mrs. Doubtfire, Dead Poets Society takes an interesting approach as far as drama is concerned with Robin Williams, as well as with comedy. Although the comedy is probably fairly toned down, especially within this film, unlike Mrs. Doubtfire. But the thing too about this film is that it doesn't really have a lot of other big names within it. It's not like Good Will Hunting that had Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, starting out their careers. It didn't have, Sally Field, which was in Miss Doubtfire. It has only Robin Williams, really, and some other actors and actresses, but not in the same category as the others. Like they really didn't become as big of names after I think Dead Poets Society. So yeah, they just kind of sort of stayed. They didn't have the same, I guess. This film didn't have, I guess, the same caliber of cast, so that's probably a reason why it's not as looked into. It's also maybe a little bit too dramatic at times, or too sad maybe for some. Although I think its drama works fairly well. But I think really in large part as to why I think this film is overlooked is because I believe it also came out during a time too when Robin Williams was kind of trying to find his sort of voice within film, and sometimes that didn't work out as well for him in some cases as it did others. And unfortunately, I think this film got probably put under the bus for that reason, even though it doesn't really deserve that. And even though, again, it had initial success, I don't think it carried over, or we don't consider it, I think, as memorable or as one that we really go to when it comes to Robin Williams' films or his work in general, because he's an all-around guy. I mean, he did television and he did stand-up, so it's really hard to, you know, think of his films in this way, and it's hard too if you don't have some other person that he kind of bounces off of, or is, you know, somebody that ultimately ends up sort of claiming fame later on. And I think that's what, in particular, this film might have struggled with, was because it has Robin Williams in it, but it doesn't have somebody else as big or as or that or that ultimately got really big. So that's a thing too that I think could have resulted in Dead Poet Society not being as well appreciated over the years compared to something like Good Will Hunting or Miss Doubtfire. Um, but basically, this film revolves around teenagers, in particular teenage boys, and they go to this really strict and very religious school, and they, you know, they have a lot of rules that they have to follow, and, you know, it's really not a fun place to be, and a lot of the teachers don't understand them, or, you know, try to make learning fun or interesting. You know, it's all very dull, and they feel so isolated too, especially considering the fact that, you know, all they have is really the school. You know, and they live at the school. It's kind of like Hogwarts in a way, where they stay at the school. Um, you know, and they have their dorms or whatnot. Even though it's not necessarily a college, it still has that private establishment name to it. But then along comes Robin Williams' character, whose name in this film is John Keating, and he ends up teaching them English, in particular poetry, and teaches them like the importance of, you know, sort of following your own path in life, and, you know, not constantly having to, you know, conform, and and he brings out a very, very more welcoming and more you know, lighthearted environment for the kids, or for the teenage boys, as opposed to, you know, kind of just drilling a bunch of, you know, information in their head. Um, and this is completely opposite of the culture that is within this school, and you sort of see how that John Keating's understanding of what schooling and what teaching should be is way different from, you know, the school's understanding of what teaching is. So again, you'll see how this plays sort of a pivotal role in the film, and how they're kind of at odds with one another as the film progresses, and you see how you know, each teenager that they try to focus on, you know, is given a certain amount of personality, and, you know, they have their own kinds of ideas and ways of thinking, and, you know, and it really works to the film's advantage to give them sort of a voice. Um, and I think this really works because I think a lot of teenagers can identify with this. I think they can feel like a lot of the teachers try to teach things in such a very similar, generic, dry, and very disciplined way, instead of teaching them in a very positive, uplifting, you know, encouraging kind of way, and at the same time be sort of lighthearted and not as uptight. I think that's something a lot of kids really like. They like teachers who actually care and take their understandings into account. as opposed to just being, very authoritarian and sort of, very, power hungry, because a lot of the teachers feel like they can just exert their authority onto the kids, and at the same time, not really teach them anything of value. And so I think this is something that really, I think, hits home to a lot of the experiences that teenagers might have, especially when it comes to teachers and when it comes to schooling. Um, and also to parenting as well, because you'll see how one of the teenage boys is sort of under the thumb of his dad, because his dad wants him to pursue this one career, but he is not like his dad, so and doesn't want to do what his dad really wants him to do. So there's also that kind of a struggle too, uh, and I think at the same time it offers a lot of things that usually we don't see within these kinds of films. Or when we do see a teacher, um, usually they're not really given that much focus within a film. They're usually kind of just the background. But I like how Robin Williams' character is sort of at the forefront, and, you know, does his tries to show a different way of, you know, uh, schooling and of learning. Um, and I think that really ultimately works. Now, again, the only explanation I can have as far as to why people don't really talk about this film all that much is again because the fact that, when you really look at the broader picture of Robin Williams' film career, it was okay, but then at the same time, a lot of the uh, things that he has done that uh, were within film, it's there the the good quality is fairly um, is just a little bit lower than as far as what was considered bad. So the bad unfortunately outweighed the good, um, and I think that's um, uh, why we don't really take his whole career seriously. And I think again too, this was a film that primarily focused on him, um, as well, and he sort of carries the whole film for the teenagers that he's trying to sort of teach. So he's really although he is not necessarily within the film the whole time, he has the most weight as far as the plot is concerned, and sort of the inspiration for the other characters. So he really carries it. Whereas within his other films, I feel that there's a lot more other characters that kind of take at least some kind of a semblance of credit. Um, for example, in Aladdin, he's the genie, he's the side character. Um, in Mrs. Doubtfire, I mean, he's the primary character, but at the same time, he's balancing off of other people's sort of interests, including Sally Fields. And you will also see too how in a film like Good Will Hunting, he's playing off of Matt Damon's character and sort of his struggles. And within this film, you do feel like that he's trying to be the sort of uh, inspiration to all these teenage boys, and be that kind of uh, good mentor figure. Um, and there's not a whole lot of other actors that again are that had the same caliber of success that Robin Williams had within other films that he was in. For example, again, like Good Will Hunting, where you had Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, and then in something like Mrs. Doubtfire, where you had Sally Field, and Mara Wilson in particular was fairly popular at the time. So, again, this film doesn't really have that same casting or that same big name like, Disney. So I think that's why usually people don't really remember this one as often. But I think it's definitely worth considering to view. Some people might say that, the plot too is just kind of it's sort of loose. Like it's not designed to be a plot that has really one big focus, except it has kind of different focuses. It's more character driven than necessarily plot driven. Whereas a lot of other Robin Williams films, I feel, they combine the plot with the characters. Whereas here, I feel, again, there's a little bit maybe more meandering. Not as much focus, because there's a lot of different little sort of subplots woven in that kind of center around one of the teenagers or something like that. And again, although it's leading to some ultimate kind of tragedy, it's not really the wholehearted focus of the film. It's part of the film and it impacts the film, but it's not the big focus, because largely it's just about the importance of teaching and how that carries on over into the next generation. So I think that's really what the heart of the film was about, and not necessarily about one particular character. More so how Robin Williams' character impacted all of the characters. So yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this film without giving too much away. But again, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.